At 6:40 on a Monday morning, a building automation alarm appears just as tenants are arriving. The dashboard says one thing, the equipment sounds normal, and the engineer who knows the seasonal workaround is on a flight, unreachable, and leaving the organization next week. 3 people are standing around the screen asking the same question. Do we intervene or do we wait?
That is exactly where key person risk becomes an operating risk. What breaks if this goes down? Sometimes the answer is the equipment. Sometimes it is the decision-making around the equipment.
And sometimes nothing is technically broken yet. The real problem is that nobody knows whether the alarm is a familiar seasonal pattern or the first sign of a serious issue. That distinction may live in one person's memory.
Exactly. Welcome to Built, Wired, and Secured. I'm Alex Morgan. Today, we're looking at what happens when the person who knows how a building really works moves on. Michael Harrington brings the property and risk perspective, and James Rogers brings facilities and reliability experience. Good to have you both here.
Glad to be here. That opening feels familiar because buildings accumulate operating history. A system may be documented, but the operating story is usually much bigger than the documentation.
Exactly. And that gap is expensive.
A drawing can show where a component is. A manual can explain what it is supposed to do. Neither necessarily tells you that, every spring, a reading drifts for a few hours after the building changes from one operating schedule to another. An experienced engineer knows what to compare first, what not to adjust, and when the pattern has crossed into something that needs escalation.
So why do organizations look at a binder, a shared drive, or a vendor contact list and feel that continuity is covered?
Because those are visible artifacts. You can point to a folder and say, there is the information. It feels reassuring. But the small decisions often never make it into that folder. Someone remembers which symptom is common, which one is new, and which temporary adjustment solved the problem last year.
And from an ownership standpoint, the organization may believe 2 people support a system when only one person understands its history. The chart says there is coverage. The operation says otherwise. Tenants feel this immediately when response slows, comfort changes, or a routine issue affects their workday.
Right. This is not about questioning the value of the experienced person. It is about asking whether the building becomes fragile because that experience is not shared.
I agree with the concern, but I am not sure I buy the idea that judgment can be neatly transferred. Some of it is pattern recognition built over years.
Right, but pattern recognition leaves clues. What conditions do you watch? What changes your decision? What would make you escalate? You cannot write down every instinct, but you can expose the situations that created the instinct.
I'm not arguing against the clues. I'm arguing against pretending a checklist captures the whole judgment. If this becomes a giant documentation exercise, people will create paperwork instead of resilience.
That is fair. The answer is not to document everything. It is to document what another responsible operator needs in order to make the next sound decision.
That gives us a useful starting point. Find the places where knowledge is concentrated. James, how do you find them in a real building?
Start with consequences. List the systems and tasks where a delay could affect safety, tenant operations, comfort, access to the building, or business continuity. Then ask, if the usual person were unavailable at 2 a.m, who could make the next sound decision?
That question reveals more than an organizational chart. Ask who gets called first, who knows which issue is recurring, who can explain the system to a new service team, and who understands the business consequence of taking it offline.
And listen for, just call me, or I usually handle that.
Exactly. Those phrases are not automatically bad. They often mean someone has been dependable, but they are signals that the process may exist inside a person's memory instead of inside the operating team.
I would also ask where the latest usable record lives, not where it is supposed to live. Where would someone actually look during a disruption?
That takes us from finding the dependency to transferring the judgment. What does effective transfer look like when the work involves facilities, IT,
building systems and tenant operations all at once.
Put people together around real work. Shadowing helps, but passive shadowing is not enough. Have the backup operator explain what they see, what they think is happening, and what they would do next. The experienced operator corrects the reasoning in the moment. That is where the learning happens.
And make the exercise relevant to the property. A backup operator needs to understand priorities and communication, not just equipment. If a comfort issue appears during a tenant event, who decides whether to adjust the operation, notify the property team, or call for specialized support?
So a tabletop exercise for building operations?
Exactly. Give the backup operator the approved records, the maintenance history, the escalation list, and the normal communication channels. Then give them a plausible problem. For example, a recurring springtime alarm, 3 prior service calls, and a tenant event scheduled that morning. Watch whether they can distinguish a known seasonal pattern from a condition that needs escalation.
And who is allowed to change that plan?
Good question, because a document nobody owns becomes another abandoned folder. The plan should name the responsible role, the backup role, the decision points, and the review date. It should describe normal conditions, warning signs, recent changes, and schedule changes without exposing sensitive layouts or credentials.
From an operational standpoint, access review belongs there too. Confirm that authorized roles have the access required to perform authorized work, and that ownership is handled through normal governance when personnel or service relationships change. The point is readiness, not sharing secrets in a checklist.
Good distinction. We are talking about accountability and capability, not publishing a map of the building.
And maintenance history is where judgment often becomes visible. An equipment list tells you what exists. History tells you how it behaves. You may see several service calls, but the useful question is, what condition led to each one? What temporary measure was used, and whether the issue returned under a particular season or load.
That context affects capital decisions too. Was a short-term adjustment masking a larger concern, or was the asset performing as expected? If that reasoning leaves with one person, the next team may either overreact or defer something important.
James, what does a weak handoff look like when everything appears organized?
It looks polished at first. There is a meeting, a folder, and a checklist with every box marked complete. Then the first unusual condition appears. The replacement operator follows the checklist, but the result is not what anyone expected. The missing piece is usually the explanation of what normal looks like, what abnormal looks like, and which trade-off the previous operator was managing.
That's fine until it fails. A checklist can create confidence without capability. The real test is whether the backup operator can use the available information, make a reasonable decision, and communicate it.
And the test should happen before the departure becomes urgent.
Choose one routine disruption, not the most complicated disaster imaginable. Let the backup operator work from the resources that actually exist. Do not rescue them too quickly. Watch how they investigate, when they pause, and whether they know who owns the next decision.
What breaks if this goes down? That question should shape the response. Does the operator know who needs to be informed? What can wait? What affects tenants or scheduled activities immediately? A technical response without an operational response is only half a response.
Then record the gaps as improvements, not as a performance test.
Exactly. If the backup cannot find the history, fix the records. If they find it but cannot interpret it, improve the training. If they know what to do but cannot reach the decision maker, fix ownership or escalation. Reliability starts with disciplined maintenance, and it also starts with disciplined knowledge sharing.
Continuity is a habit, not a document. Tenants feel the difference when the building keeps operating safely and predictably, even when a familiar person is unavailable.
So here is the practical version. Find one critical system or task where knowledge is concentrated in one person. Transfer the reasoning through active shadowing and a realistic scenario. Then validate the handoff by watching a backup operator act, communicate, and escalate with the resources that really exist.
Keep it useful. Technology should support operations, not complicate them. Capture the patterns, dependencies, decisions, and consequences that help another operator keep the building steady.
The best day in operations is the one nobody notices. If the knowledgeable person leaves and the building continues to run safely and responsively, that is not luck. That is continuity planning working as intended.
That wraps up this episode of Built, Wired, and Secured. Today we explored why operational knowledge is an asset, how single points of knowledge form, and how a readiness test can reveal whether a handoff is truly complete. Before your next transition, identify one critical building system or operational task that depends heavily on one person, involve the backup operator, and schedule a practical continuity review. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us. Until next time, make sure the systems you're responsible for are built to last, wired with intention, and secured for the real world.